my name is Laura and welcome to my channel Boundless Books. Oh hey, it's been a while. I've been incredibly delinquent about posting videos on this channel. I was doing this little thing where I was planning a wedding and getting married, so that kind of took up a little bit of my time. But enough about that. Today I'm here to talk about books, specifically books that I read during the months of August and September. And I've read so many books and it's been so long since I've stood in front of a camera to talk about them that I'm actually not going to be able to include everything in this video, or else it would be an hour long and you guys would never want to sit through that. So I'll probably follow up in my next video with a few more of the books that I couldn't fit into this one. So without further ado, let's start with my most disappointing book first and just get it out of the way, shall we? This is a book that I actually hauled a few videos ago. I was really excited when I found it. The premise sounded incredibly interesting, and it's also the start of a series that is mostly all out, which is great because that keeps me occupied for a very long amount of time. But unfortunately, this book was a major disappointment. The book that I'm referring to is The Tiger's Curse by Colleen Houck. So I should admit that the cover is what initially drew me in. It's such a cool cover, it's all shiny and this tiger looks really badass. And then when I read the blurb, I was really hooked. It follows a young girl who joins the circus for the summer and becomes kind of enamored with this white tiger, which is part of one of the acts, only to discover that he's an Indian prince under an ancient curse. Sadly, what killed this book for me was not the premise, it was the writing style. The author broke, in my opinion, one of the cardinal rules of writing, which is you need to show and not tell. If you've ever taken a creative writing course, this is something that a professor will drill into your brain. So instead of saying, for instance, she was so sad, instead you would write something along the lines of, she could feel tears welling in her eyes, her bottom lip quivered with emotion. That was a really terrible example. I'm not a writer, but you guys get the idea. Instead of just simply stating a fact, provide as many details as possible so that the reader can put themselves in that character's place. So throughout the story, the author kind of just fell into that pattern of just stating facts rather than really providing all those details to allow the reader to kind of glean what was going on. I will say that I did stick with the book for pretty much 50% of the way in the hopes that I could get past the stilted writing style and just allow myself to get drawn into the characters and the storyline, but I just found all of the characters to feel incredibly one-dimensional because of the writing style, and you know, about halfway through I just said, I'm not enjoying this, so I'm not gonna finish it. So based on all of that, I'd have to give this a 1 out of 5 stars, but I'd love to hear from somebody who's read this series, preferably somebody who's read all the books, to let me know if it improves. I really wanted to like this. It has such a cool premise, but yeah, the writing style just really didn't do it for me. Whew, okay, we got that bad one out of the way. Now let's move on to what was probably my favorite book over the past couple of months, and that is The Forbidden Wish by Jessica Khoury, and I'm most likely saying her last name incorrectly. So this book is actually a retelling of the Aladdin story. If you've watched some of my previous videos, you've probably picked up on the fact that I do like fairy tale retellings. And this is actually the first time that I've ever read a retelling of Aladdin. Weirdly, I avoided this book for a while. The cover made it appear a little bit juvenile, so I dinged the book only because the cover art is, I don't know, I didn't connect to it at all. That being said, I was blown out of the water by this book. It is really awesome. This book is told from the perspective of the jinn who lives in the lamp. Her name is Zahara, and she has been imprisoned in the lamp for many years, somewhat forgotten about, until one night this thief named Aladdin stumbles upon her. Aladdin releases Zahara from the lamp, and the two go on a number of adventures together. Now, before you start imagining that this is exactly like the Disney version of Aladdin, I will warn you right now, it is not at all. The author totally forges new territory. One of my favorite aspects of the book was all of the lore around the jinn. So overall, I would give this book a solid 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it, and it's also a standalone, which is so refreshing to find a standalone fantasy novel. So the story was great. Both Zahara and Aladdin were wonderful characters. Zahara was incredibly spunky and strong-willed, and I love to see her be the savior of the day in this book. So overall, I would highly recommend reading this. Don't be put off by the cover looking slightly juvenile. I would 100% recommend going out and buying this. Moving on, the next book that I would like to talk about is the book Ruined by Amy Tintera. So I actually listened to this book on audiobook. I'm pretty obsessed with the whisper sync functionality on Kindle. I swear I'm not sponsored by Amazon, although I wish they would sponsor me because I spend an ungodly amount of money on the Kindle store. But basically, if you buy a Kindle book, you can buy the audiobook for a reduced price. And then wherever you stop listening to the audiobook, the Kindle book will sync to that page and vice versa. It is magical and absolutely amazing. So I think because I listened to this on audiobook, I didn't enjoy it perhaps quite as much as I would have had I started reading it, because sometimes I find that the narrators that they choose to narrate these audiobooks are a little bit melodramatic in terms of how they deliver the reading. So I ended up halfway through the audiobook switching over to reading the Kindle, and I enjoyed it far more once I kind of left off listening to the narrator. All faults of the audiobook aside, I still don't think this was the most original YA fantasy book that I've read recently. It definitely falls into a lot of the stereotypical YA tropes. That being said, I still enjoyed it. I read through it fairly quickly. The book follows a woman named Emelina Flores, who was meant to be the queen of a kingdom called Ruina. Unfortunately, her kingdom was taken over by the kingdom of Lyra. To get back at the royal family of Lyra, Emelina disguises herself as the betrothed of the prince of Lyra in hopes of being able to infiltrate that royal family from within. The story has a little bit of magic, it has a little bit of a love-hate romance blossoming throughout it, which is all very fun and enjoyable to read about, but not, as I said, particularly novel. So overall, I gave the book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I'm fairly certain there's going to be a sequel, and I'll probably read it just because I'm kind of engaged in the storyline. So yeah, if you decide to pick it up, I don't think you'll regret it, but was it the most amazing thing I've read over the past couple of months? Definitely not. Moving right along, the next book that I want to talk about is the third book in the series, and it is called Dance of Steel by Jordan Rivet. I've talked about this series in more detail in some of my previous videos, so I'm going to link those on the screen for you guys to check out. I would highly encourage you to do so and to pick up this series because it is fabulous. This book is the continuation of a fantasy series that follows a young woman who wants to be a professional duelist while struggling with her heritage of being a magical fire worker. So I was quite excited when this book came out to get my hands on it and to find out more about Dara and Civ's story. Unfortunately, for much of this book, the two characters are separated, which kind of killed me a little bit because my favorite part of this series to date is the banter between those two characters. I think Jordan Rivet does an amazing job with the dialogue in these books. Overall, I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars because I still just really love the story and the whole world that Jordan Rivet has created, but I was very sad to see the two main characters separated and to miss out on all the hilarious dialogue that could have been. The next book, or should I say books, that I would like to talk about are The Falconer and The Vanishing Throne by Elizabeth May. I actually attempted to read The Falconer when it first came out over a year or so ago, and for some crazy reason I read half of it and then I just stopped, which baffles me because when I tell you the description of this book, you're gonna be shocked because this is everything that I would want in a book. It is so in line with what I've been reading recently that it is crazy that I never finished it. The book is set in Scotland during the Victorian era and follows a young woman named Alina Cameron, who is a normal society girl until one night her mother is brutally murdered by a fae. Alina then discovers that she has this rare magical ability that allows her to both sense and hunt the fae that inhabit her world unseen by most. Under the tutelage of a high fae named Kieran McKay, Alina hones her ability while bouncing on the edge of what is socially acceptable. I absolutely adore books that are set in Victorian era with elements of magic thrown in. I actually created a whole video just around this genre of books. I was totally enamored of the book The Dark Days Club, which came out recently and is very similar to this series. The second book in this series came out recently, and it's kind of what sparked my interest in revisiting The Falconer and trying to figure out what turned me off the book the first time around. I could find absolutely nothing. I have no explanation as to why I didn't finish it. I loved it. I read it in like a day, and then I moved quickly on to the second book in the series, and I think it's actually even better than the first book, which is saying a lot because usually the second book is when the slump starts to kick in. So I couldn't recommend the series enough. Overall, I give both books a 5 out of 5 stars. They are excellent. There's also this adorable but completely crass pixie in the books that I could not stop laughing whenever I read his dialogue. So I would 100% recommend checking this series out if you like Victorian fantasies. And even if you don't, if you just like hilarious dialogue, again, check this series out. It's so good. To round out this video, I want to talk about two books which not only have very similar titles, but very similar themes. The first book that I'm going to talk about is a book that I was really highly anticipating reading in September, and it is called A Shadow Bright and Burning by Jessica Cluess. This book is set in Victorian times in an alternate version of London and follows a young woman named Henrietta Howell who has the very inconvenient habit of bursting into flames. Given that women are not meant to be practicing magic of any kind, Henrietta is understandably quite concerned about revealing this talent to anyone. However, when her talent is discovered by no less than a sorcerer by the name of Agrippa, rather than being persecuted for her abilities, she is accepted into Her Majesty's Society of Sorcerers. These sorcerers are tasked with finding a way to protect London, and all of England for that matter, from these 7 ancients which have descended upon the world and are basically wreaking havoc. My favorite aspect of this book was by far the descriptions of the different kinds of magic. Interestingly, the author makes a distinction between sorcerers and magicians. Society reveres sorcerers while completely outlawing magicians from practicing. Basically, these 7 ancients were released into the world via the help of magicians, therefore they are reviled and considered to be nasty tricksters. I would have to say that by far the weakest aspect of this book was the romantic situation. There was like a love square going on for much of the novel. It seemed to be that like every male character that Henrietta encountered would become some kind of romantic interest for her, which I found to be incredibly annoying given that there was so much going on outside the book that was much higher stakes than a romance. And I think ultimately all the romantic interests that were introduced in this book were sort of red herrings for a romance that is yet to even develop and will most likely occur in the second book in the series. Due to that annoying love square, I'm giving this book a 3 out of 5 stars. That being said, I'm still going to read the next book whenever it does come out because I am very curious about the main character's past and the origin of these 7 ancients. So I do want to find out how all of that resolves, and I'm hoping the annoying love square will not make an appearance in the next book. The last book that I want to talk about is called Burning Bright by Melissa McShane. And this book also follows a young woman who has pyrotechnic abilities. I definitely went on a bit of an Amazon recommendation spiral, reading a lot of books that are super related to each other. However, I'm really happy that I found Burning Bright because it was basically Pirates of the Caribbean meets Jane Austen, which hopefully sounds just as fabulous to you as it does to me. So as I said, this book follows a young woman named Eleanor Pembroke who discovers that she is a scorcher and has the ability to create fire. And not only is she a scorcher, but she's an extraordinary scorcher. In the version of London that Eleanor lives, magical abilities abound. There are people who are movers who can move both themselves and objects. There are people who can basically teleport from one location to another. They're called bounders. There's also people who can communicate telepathically. There's a whole host of abilities, and within each of these abilities, there's different sort of degrees to which people have these magical powers. As an extraordinary scorcher, Eleanor has a very extreme version of her power, and were she a man, this would allow her to do a whole range of activities. However, because Eleanor is a woman, she's basically being auctioned off in the marriage market as sort of a genetic prize because her offspring would presumably produce quite extraordinary children as well. Eleanor, however, is quite unhappy with the prospect of being auctioned off in marriage, so she decides to run off and join the Navy and to travel to the Caribbean to fight pirates. Much of the story revolves around Eleanor's journey on the ship that she eventually gets stationed on, and a little bit of her relationship with the crew members and the captain of that ship, also her exploration of her powers, which were very cool. Overall, I have to give this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's pretty much everything I want to read in the book. I've read other books by Melissa McShane in the past, specifically The Smoke-Scented Girl, which was equally as enjoyable. So if she writes more in the future, I will 100% buy her books. So that's a little taste of what I've been reading recently. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, that list is not exhaustive, so I'll be following up in my next video with a few of the other books that I've read recently and enjoyed. So if you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date with my latest content. And until next time, my name is Laura, and thank you guys so much for watching. Bye! Whew, I'm nervous, I've been filming the video for so long. I can do this without making a fool of myself.